everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's poppin', Rush Nation? Welcome back to the 5 Yard Flagship. Say, we should just go, like, it's a retrospective show today. For those that are joining you on the video show, you can see the title. And for those of you listening, I'm assuming you've seen the title because it's been published and you don't listen to stuff blank, because that would be A, weird, and B, very confusing, because you could get all sorts of nonsense. Yeah, we should just go back to being 5 Yard Rush. There's no other podcast now. It is just us.
Yeah.
You know, although it is still the flagship, we do have that skull and crossbones hoisted high above the mast.
We're still the
Yeah, that's it. We yeah, if you are watching on the video, welcome in. Please do tell your friends. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, hit the bell. And as for those that don't make it all the way to the audio or video, Murph does always a cheerful goodbye on the video, which you just can't see on the podcast because audio's not visual, but video is. I don't really know what's happening. We're talking about 2024 retrospectively, Murph, and what happened, what we didn't know was going to happen. I know that sounds really weird, but stuff that's a bit squiffy, right? That we perhaps can learn from going forward, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And you know, I think it's just about trying to understand what went right, what went wrong, and the trends of the year. And I think it's really important that we understand kind of what happened, right? So that we can use this as our analysis for a dynasty season. We can use this in our analysis for redraft season, for best ball season. It's, you know, if you're not prepared to go back and look at what happened, you get into this rut of just trying to work out. Like, the NFL moves at quite a fast pace in terms of evolution of strategy, evolution of play calling, evolution of trends. And so I'm not swearing, it's a family show, but yeah, he's not. I should have actually kicked off the show by going Duval. Liam Cohen's very weird press. Did you I think, did I send it to you where he went Duval?
No, I have seen it though.
It's so funny that the coach speak, Greg, has taken that clip and turned it into a 1 hour video of him just doing that.
Oh my goodness.
I also really enjoyed his honesty is like the main foundation from a man who did a lot of lying in his final 24 hours as the Bucks OC. So anyway, this isn't a Buccaneers podcast. It's just I got derailed by Harry. So thanks for that. Yeah, important to go back, look at what happened in 2024. Important to understand what happened because the NFL evolves. Trends come and go. And it is a bit secular. So you look at the early 2000s, you had a couple of really dominant running backs, but not that many. Then you start to see this rise of the running backs. You start to see the fall of the running backs. Are we starting to see a bit of a rise of the running backs again? What is going on with, streaming positions and how easy, how difficult was it to stream? What about trends of injuries? What about touchdowns? Who was fluky in the touchdown column? Who didn't get their just desserts? And I think it's really important to kind of look between the lines of things and trying to understand what happened in the NFL in 2024. And I think that for me, this is more than sort of one show, right? We'll break it down by position and bits and pieces. But what I will say is that I think it's just important to just highlight that this will be probably worth watching if you don't watch the show. And thinking about, because I'm going to show some graphs, which we'll talk about some of the trends, and I can't do that on an audio podcast. So I would recommend going to the video and watching back if you find some of this really interesting and want to know a little bit more. Because, and again, this is sort of the start of the 2024 retro. This is really just some key things I have found so far since the season's ended. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more interesting stuff as I continue to dive into it and understand it a little bit more.
This is the perfect opportunity to get your smart TV up, put YouTube on, and get us in, I don't know, glorious 55, 60, however many inches your TV is. My Earth graph will look bigger, better. So, yeah, get your phone away, get your laptop away, get us on your TV, show your friends and family our glorious faces, and then some graphs. It will be worth it, I promise.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an important way to do it in the game.
Yeah. So Murph's doc has several Google Sheets, not docs, Google Sheets that we're going to be popping up. We are going to, as Murph said, potentially do more than one show on this, depending on how long stuff takes. So there's not going to be a finite stop here. It will stop when it naturally stops, and then the next one will continue. Otherwise, we will go until past the Super Bowl potentially, and nobody needs that in their lives right now.
And I didn't even put everything in the doc, right? I just put what I thought would be one show, but we might not even get to all of it. I think it's important. So, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with running backs? Do you want to start with touchdown regression by position, or do you want to do streaming?
I think we should. Are we going to do a positional show for everything, or is it just running backs? WTF?
We will do a positional show for everything, but there is just something that's underlying the running back landscape that I think is really important to do.
Yep.
And I think it's important to talk about tonight before we get into a lot of dynasty talk. And the reason why is because, and you know this better than anyone, right, that this draft class coming up is loaded at the running back position. And so actually part of what we're talking about here in terms of the trends of the last 12 years at the running back position, what we saw in 2024, I think feeds nicely and dovetails nicely into this narrative that this running back class is loaded and that we could see almost a bit of a renaissance at the position, which is built on the foundations of last year. So I think that's a good piece to do now while people are getting into their dynasty heads and looking at the dynasty class. So I think that's a good one to get into. And I can keep this to mostly running back. So we could do running back touchdown regression and running back streaming, and we can keep it a running back focus show if that's what you kind of wish. And it's up to you. You're the pilot here.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I've opened the first sheet, and as I say that, my tablet's frozen. But the first sheet is confusing to me.
Yeah.
So I may be the pilot, but I need the menu read to me.
Yeah. So look, I mean, I'm not going to pull up the sheet for everybody, right? Why Stocks is confused is it's 12 years of running back data, but I have the graphs which are kind of underneath. And all this data lives in different tabs by year. So I should just sort of give a bit of a parallel, right? So we know that the running back position is incredibly important in fantasy football. We know that there's been a bit of a decline. There was a rise. And so what I wanted to try and do is I wanted to understand what goes on at the position year to year. So I started to track RB1 overall performance, as in the best running back per year for fantasy football, what the 6th best running back did overall, what the 12th best running back did overall, what the average RB1 did, so taking the top 12, averaging their score, what the average RB2 did, then looking at the mean and the difference between that RB1 and RB2 performance by points to understand sort of the high-end elite of the class versus depth. I then looked at rush attempts, touches, touchdowns, scrimmage yards, and yards per touch. So it's quite a lot of data and information. And I did this purely on the top 24 running backs. I didn't really care about anyone that wasn't in the top 24. Reasons for that were I wanted to remove outliers, and I wanted to really focus on just the overall finishes. And I could have done this all the way down to RB3, but really what I wanted to understand was are RB1s a significant improvement on RB2s? If so, how much? And how does that trend year to year? And I think that's kind of a good place to start. So I have got some slides or some bits to share, and I think it's good to kind of start looking at these. I'm just trying to pull it up because I think for me I think what we want to do is try and understand these pieces in particular and like why this is happening. So this is the first one. It should be up on the screen. I'm going to move us. That doesn't help if we're there. We're going to have to live on the side. So I hope people can kind of see this, right? So this is everything I talked about. So this top line here is the number one running back overall in fantasy football performance. The red line is the RB6. And if you notice, this marries pretty closely to this green line, which is the average RB performance. So that's taking 1 through 12, whereas the red line is just pure the RB6. And that green line is the overall mean of all the running back ones. So that line's always going to trend pretty carefully, pretty closely, except for here in 2018, there was a bit of a difference, but the rest of the time it's pretty close. So probably shows you I don't need to pick the RB6 overall, but you sometimes just want to do it from a statistical checkpoint. Then you look at RB12, so the bottom end of the RB12 performance. And then, this green line is the RB1 mean, and this pink magenta line is the RB2 mean, right? So what this is telling us here is we're looking at 2015. This is 12 years worth of data. 2015, we see this sort of real dip across the position as a whole, except for a slight rise in the RB2 mean. Then we see a big rise, and then we see it plateau between 16 and 18. It's not a lot of growth. You start to see the RB1 mean goes up at a higher rate than the RB2 mean, which means that elite performance is being rewarded a little bit more than not. Then you got this huge spike. That spike is Christian McCaffrey in 2019, who had that crazy year and kind of broke the graph. And then we see this decline, right? From 2020 to 20, we get a small bump in 2023 on elite performance. It goes down this year. But if you look at the rest of the trends, they all kind of spike downwards. The RB12 kind of does a small rise, and so does the RB2 mean. But the RB1 mean stays, it stays around this sort of it regresses down from 2019 near its peak. 2018, 2019 was near its peak. It drops quite considerably 2020, and it hovers up. Smaller the bump in 23, in 22, sorry, down in 23, and then we see this little rise closer to its peak last year in RB1 performance. And then, the RB2 performance has seen a really slow, drastic rise, but fairly consistent. So non-drastic. It's a very slow, gradual rise. So what we're inferring from this chart is 2013 running back performance was not the end-all be-all. We saw in 2014, 2015, that's still very much the case. And then we started to see this explosion in 2016, where running back performance started to really matter. This is David Johnson's and the likes. We started to see running backs drafted earlier in the draft. We started to see Todd Gurley go. We started to see all these sort of running backs come into the league. And then we see this over the course of this 2016 to 2019 period. You've got in that time, Christian McCaffrey goes high in the draft. Leonard Fournette goes high in the draft. Saquon Barkley goes high in the draft. So we're starting to see this. The NFL is starting to value running backs at quite a significant rate. This leads to this spike performance, and then we start to see a decline, quite a sharp decline, almost back to these 2013 numbers. Not quite as bad as 2015, but we're starting to see the decline back down to those sort of numbers. And then we see a bit of a sharp rise, not in the RB1 overall, but in the other lines. We see in every other category, we see a nice sharp rise in 2024. Now, 1 year doesn't make a trend. I understand that. That's fine. But that's the kind of context of what we're talking about here. So if I move to the next graph, it is going to kind of start to understand or explain a little bit, just a bit more in terms of what we're talking about here. So this is average rush attempts and average touches. So again, this graph goes a bit nuts. Again, you know, when we saw this down point in 2015, well, that correlated really sharply with a decline in rush attempts and a decline in touches. This top chart, this top line is the touches, the bottom line is the rush attempts. We saw a significant decline in 2018 as well. And that is effectively telling us that the elite performance was there, but there was effectively no running back 2-level support. So because we saw rises in the top end of the fantasy football running back position, we started to see that actually a big separation. So it was important to go and get running backs early in those drafts because we started to see this sort of elite touch level. But that's why we're getting a decline here, even though all the other graphs go upwards. Then we see the Christian McCaffrey year, big spike. And then again, we kind of go this plateau down. We get a little sharp rise in 22, rebounding back from a couple of years of decline, which is quite normal. Then we get a decline in 2023, and then we get a nice sharp rise, and we're trending towards almost highs and the high peaks that we saw in 2014 and 2016 at the position. So it's important. Again, 1 year isn't a trend. But again, it's this whole, we're looking at the counter theories that were born out of this decline. And out of this decline, we've started to see zero RB dead zone, and the value of running backs. And what this is telling you is that the NFL, when it came to average rush attempt, again, this is just the top 24 running backs in fantasy football. This isn't across every running back. So this isn't like, oh, well, the NFL swiveled away from rush game or anything like that. We know that those rush numbers remain fairly similar, but we know that effectively what we're extrapolating from these numbers is while there's a decline, they're going to running back by committee. We're going back to other forms of running back. So the top 24 are just seeing a decline as opposed to the position as a whole. So then we're going to go and look at more about the position. So this is the difference between the RB1 and the mean and the RB2 mean. So this is, again, trying to understand what has happened at the position to highlight elite performance. So this is PPR points. So we saw it was around about 80 points, peaked to over 90 points. Then we saw this big decline in 2015 to just over 50 points. Then a big sort of jump up to 85 points. Then we see this huge peak towards 110 in 2018. Then we see this huge decline for a few years in a row, all the way down to 2021, where it drops to 70 points. We see a small 2022 sort of one-off rise, which we see in all the graphs. 2022 has sort of bucked a 3-year trend in decline. And then it fell away, and then we saw a rise again last year. So what this is telling you is people played the game banking on this rise, and that this RB dead zone, zero RB approach cashed in on this slide, because actually the elite performance of RB1s was being steadily declining over a period of time, and this bore alternative theories. But again, we're starting to see, and 1 year isn't a trend, and I'll keep saying that this is starting to bend back the other way, which will tie into, again, why this running back class is so interesting. So again, we're going to look at average yards per touch next. And this is, again, important because it's trying to understand where there is particular gains and understanding why this stuff is important, and trying to understand the edge. Okay, so here is average yards per touch per year of the top 12 running backs. So again, the spike year in 2018, they were hyper efficient with touches. We've never seen these levels anywhere near again. You're up to nearly 5.7 yards per touch. They've always been sort of hovering around this sort of 5 to 5.25 range, which again is pretty consistent the rest of the time. We see these sharp declines. They go back to 2021, the lowest it was at any point at 5 yards a touch. And then again, we see this huge spike, 2024. And again, 1 year doesn't make a trend. But still, what you're seeing here is that actually the top 12 are starting to become a bit of a separation here. Last graph on this, and then I'll sort of summarize this like a professor. Because there is a theory for all of this, but I want to show the data first. This is average scrimmage yards by year of the top 24 running backs. So again, huge decline in 2015. It's consistent with everything we've seen in this graph. Spike in 2018, 2019. Again, consistent with everything we've seen. Christian McCaffrey props this up quite significantly. Sharp decline in 2020, 2021. Little bucket of trend in 2022. Decline in 2023. And a huge rise in 2024. Again, going back to near peak levels of 2015, 2019, 2016. Is this over 1,550 scrimmage yards? That's total rushing and receiving yards. Okay. So all of this is like, okay, what does all of this mean? And I sit here and it's like, okay, these are graphs. Yeah, you're telling me there's a decline, there was a rise, there's a decline, there was a rise. First of all, the things are secular in the NFL. They will always go down and up. There are some numbers I want to paint to explain some of this. Now, I sort of already extrapolated that 2016 started to see a rise of the running back position due to the talent that was coming into the NFL. We talked about high draft capital to stock players over a couple of years. We started to see bigger contracts paid to star players like Derrick Henry, like Ezekiel Elliott, like Todd Gurley. You know, they all got big extensions, and for the first time the running back position started to see some movement upwards in terms of salary. They were basically telling you, the NFL, that running backs are valuable, and then you go, well, okay, but what about this decline here? What was going on in here between 2020 and 2023? Yes, you got a spike in 2022. Well, I think a lot of that is due to injury. So I ran some numbers on injuries. So to give you an idea, in 2020, running backs missed a total of 212 games. This is across the entire position. In 2023, that number rose to 324 games. So that is a 53% increase of injuries at the position in that time. So my theory and hypothesis is that injuries played a significant part of what happened in this period of decline. Second thing I would say is that the amount of players that came into the NFL that were drafted in that time that were elite talent probably wasn't there. There was a few, and people can tell me that there was a few that have come in that time and have subsequently contributed to these numbers. Bijan Robinson will be one that's pointed at, as is Jahmyr Gibbs. But it's needless to say that between 2019 and 2023, there was a bit of a lack of significant running back depth and improvement. In 2024, there was almost none. The only player that contributed to these numbers was Bucky Irving in 2024. So in the last couple of years, you really only have a couple of players in those draft classes that are contributing to top 24 numbers. So there has been a significant drop-off. So why the rise in 2024? Because we've seen a significant drop-off of talent coming into the NFL. So if there's been no additional talent in the NFL, and there hasn't been any additional, so we're seeing injuries, we're not seeing the player pool increase. What changed in 2024 to start to see a rise? And what changed in 2024 was the best free agency market the running back position has ever seen. You had Saquon Barkley, you had Aaron Jones, you had DeAndre Swift, you had Josh Jacobs, you had Derrick Henry, You had a whole Tony Pollard. You had a whole gluttony of some of the best running backs who were all, not entirely, but a lot of them were tied to underperforming teams or teams where their skill set was not purely aligned to what they do best. And so what happened is all of these players ended up going into the market after their 5th year or 4th year, or a bit longer in the cases of like Derrick Henry, and were able to go on to teams that were significantly better and who paid them up for their services. We saw record contracts at the position to Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley goes from the New York Giants to the Philadelphia Eagles. He's about to play in the Super Bowl. His production goes absolutely off the charts. Derrick Henry goes from the Tennessee Titans to the Baltimore Ravens. Tony Pollard goes from Dallas Cowboys to Tennessee, but he's effectively nailed a role where he's seen off all challenges and he's finally got a solo role. Josh Jacobs goes from the Raiders to the Packers. Aaron Jones trades one good team for another good team. Didn't really see much improvement, but still steadies off. But my point is that you've got this scenario where a lot of running backs changed and a lot of their circumstances improved. So you had this ability where running backs changed, went into better situations, and were compensated as a result of that, which has allowed for this significant regrowth. So the NFL wasn't changing into this morphed passing league and we don't care about running backs and everyone's going to run running back by committee, which is what the pseudo narrative was. Far from it, the NFL was struggling to get talent and was struggling to find people that they were really looking to bank on, put their money down, say, that's our running back, that's the guy we're going to give 350 touches to this year. And it's showing you that actually NFL teams want that guy, but have been struggling to get that guy. And so why this ties into this draft class is this draft class is loaded. There are 8, 10, 12 guys in this class who could be difference makers at the position. This is the best class of running backs we've probably ever had. We've certainly had since I've analyzed rookie classes. And so this trend can, and again, 1 year isn't a trend, so I shouldn't call it a trend, but this upward cycle is something that could continue because effectively we're not going to see running backs retire. The running backs that contributed in the top 24, very few of them are going to be on the move. So as long as they stay injury-free, this trend should increase. But then on top of that, we should be seeing newer running backs come in and actually push the ceiling up. So now the question becomes, is it a case of elite performance? And is elite performance going to be the separator? Or are we actually building in a load of depth that therefore actually tanks the value at the position? And that's the thing I'm not entirely sold on yet. And it's hard to know because we don't know all of these running backs in detail. We don't know their draft capital. Heck, we don't even know what team they're on yet. We don't know the requirements and where they're going. We don't even know all the head coaches in the league yet. And so it's really hard to sit here and point about where all of these running backs are going to slot into and go and make an impact on these particular numbers. But what I will say is this, is that the running back position is about to become loaded. It's therefore should see a significant rise from the floor, but we should also see a significant rise in elite performance. And so extrapolating all of this and putting this into a hypothesis and understanding what has happened, I will summarize with this. The NFL didn't just get lazy with the run and didn't think running back by committee was the way to go. It was either doing that due to a lack of talent or a lack of availability due to health. Again, a 54% increase in injuries at the position from 2020 to 2023. So 2022 saw a decline in injuries, which is again why we're seeing the spike performance. And then we see it go more injuries in 2023, which sees this decline again. So again, injuries played a factor, talent provided a factor, and the fact that the good talent was tied on the not great rosters. All of a sudden, this big change in 2024, running backs got healthier. I don't have the final numbers, but I would expect that those running back numbers significantly decreased in terms of number of injuries, just looking at the number of running backs that played over 15 games. Then you look at the fact of it's going to be a much deeper running back position than we've probably ever seen. And the fact that we've seen that the NFL values running backs. They are paying them more than they ever have done. Yes, okay, rise of the salary cap, blah, 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 blah. I get it. But these guys, the elite players, earned big contracts in the history of the position last year. So the NFL is telling you that they will pay the right players the right money. It's just a question of how many of those guys are out there. And when you see what Saquon has done to the Eagles, and you see what Henry was doing with the Ravens, and you're seeing all the impact these running backs are having, there are many teams that are very jealous they don't have one of those guys. And so the fact that a lot of them can now go and get guys in the draft that are going to help them is going to help. But running back by committee, I think, was more a situational thing due to injury and a lack of talent than it was a way of life in the NFL. And I think a lot of people will try and tell you that running back position is not great, fade the position, invest in wide receiver, you'll get a better team. I will say this: zero RP, running back dead zone, all of that's at your peril this year, because all signs point to the running back position in 2025 being significantly stronger than 2024, and that performance rising as a result.
That was
talk for a long time.
I feel like I'm at this position now where I am soaking this in like a sponge. I've never been in a lecture, and this is about as close as I think I've ever been. And I am thoroughly enjoying it. I think you are very right, though. But I think there's a potential for us to see an uptick in elite talent next year for fantasy, but also for the mean to go up as well. Yeah. I think there will. I don't want to nail my hat to the peg or whatever the term is, but I think I am potentially going to start a lot of my drafts by going running back next year and stacking as high as I can with talent as high as I can, because I think it is a massive difference maker, especially like you say with the incoming players. There could be 10 teams now that are on the precipice of playoffs that are running back short that can draft a running back and not have to pay them, like we're seeing with James Cook at the moment with Buffalo and teams like that, where they have all the pieces and then they just, because they don't have the draft capital to get a good running back. But this year the draft class is so low, we might even see some of these go sort of mid-second, and it would just be phenomenal for the teams to get them at mid-second.
Or even third round. And listen, there's change makers at the position. Buccaneers drafted Bucky Irving in the 4th round. You look at what the 49ers do. They're always picking up running backs in that range that are highly effective. You can get later round running backs that are effective. It's fewer and further between. Tyrone Tracy, I think, was he a 6th, 7th round pick as a rookie? For me, that there are some later round gems, but I think this class is so loaded that, I think you'll get a lot of these guys in the 2nd, the 3rd round. I actually think that because it's so loaded, their draft capital is going to be hit as a result. So I actually think that you're going to get these guys in the 2nd round, because I'll be honest with you, between I'm really early in my eval, so I don't want to nail myself to this mast, but I think the difference between the RB6 and the RB12 in this class is not great. I don't think it's huge. And I think the fact that it's so deep, teams will go, well, we've got these 6 or 7 players and they're all pretty close in eval, so we'll punt it and we'll go get one in the next round. And I think that could collectively drive the price down on these running backs. And I think, look, we don't know. We're January 30th as we're recording this. All right, this is way early. But if this happens, I guarantee you that I don't want to call them the analytical community or whatever, right? But they're going to tell you that these players aren't good because of their draft capital. And sometimes draft capital is driven by market forces. If there's a huge abundancy of something, there is less urgency to go and get them, which means that doesn't mean that it just means their value declines because everyone has what they need, or there's a huge supply and therefore no one's in a rush to go and get them. But all of a sudden, when that supply starts to dwindle and people are in a desperate need, they will overpay for assets. So, we will see in this draft class, Sanders and Cam Ward go realistically in the top 5 of the NFL draft. Right. They're not top 5 players.
No.
They're not difference makers at the position. But they will go top 5. Because if you miss on those guys, all bets are off at the quarterback position here. It's a biblically bad quarterback class. Same goes with the wide receiver position. There are 2 or 3 really good wide receivers in this class. Everyone else is a bit meh. Yeah, there might be 1 or 2 that go, yeah, they might have surprised, but there isn't much at this position in the wide receiver in the wide receiver class. And so when this happens, the elite players will go well above their expected value because there's a scarcity on them. We see it every year, but people don't factor into it. People think Caleb Williams is a great quarterback because he went 1 overall. No, he went 1 overall because someone was stupid to take him 1 overall. I mean, technically that's his worth because someone's paid it. But it doesn't make it right. Like, if I go out and spend £30,000 on a deck of cards, technically it makes that deck of cards £30,000, but is anyone going to give me £30,000 for it? No. Not if it's a standard deck of cards I can get down the shop for a £5.
Yep.
You know, and that's the point is I think sometimes people think that the draft capital is more important than the landing spot. And analytics over the years says there's some science in that. And there are some elements in which I agree, especially at the wide receiver position. I think that is definitely more relevant. And maybe at the quarterback position, because we know that quarterbacks from rounds 2 through 7 very rarely do anything. You've got exceptions, but there's not many. Fine, I get it. But at the same token, I think don't worry if a good running back goes in the 3rd round. I think it says more that the class is good and that teams are happy to wait. Then, in fact, it's a confidence in the position.
Yeah,
more than the NFL doesn't value running backs. And I guarantee you, we'll get to draft night. We'll get the day after the draft, and someone will tell you, "Oh, well, these running backs went low, a lot lower than expected. The NFL doesn't value running backs." And it's just counterintuitive to everything we're seeing from the GMs, from football, from everything in total. It's just a complete nonsense narrative that is founded by absolutely nothing other than the running backs on the board that they had on their board went lower than where they had them going. And so whose analysis is right and wrong doesn't actually matter. What matters is actually the understanding of the why. And everything we're learning from the NFL is that they value elite performers. They willing to pay top performers. They want top performers. There's a scarcity at the position in the league. And so this draft class is welcomed. And so don't worry about the draft capital of the running backs. More worry about the fit and the opportunity that they're going to have.
If you're an NFL GM and you can afford to go and stiffen up the trenches on either side or draft a wide receiver or a corner if need be, grab yourself a safety in the 2nd and then grab one of these sort of 6 to 12 range running backs in the 3rd or 4th. It's the same as doing it in the 3rd and losing out on somebody you actually need, because like you say, this class is so stacked. I think we could potentially see a fantasy football like running back run in the NFL draft. We could get to a point where everybody's real itchy for a running back, and then a few teams will pull trigger, bang, bang, bang on running backs because they all want a piece of that pie. It just depends on how late that pie is willing to come out of the fridge.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point for sure. And I think that is something to watch and to keep an eye on. I think what I would say, going back to all that analysis, is, you know, if you're one of these players who have been not drafting the running back position early, if you do that this year, just the gut feeling in the early 2025 retro is, I think you'll pay. I think you will be hampered not taking an elite running back early. I think that's a really difficult differentiator to come back from. I think it's much easier to find replacements at other positions than it is at the running back position. And I understand the argument that you've got elite performance at wide receiver and that they will be difference makers, and I don't doubt that. But I find that wide receiver performance is far easier to predict than running back performance. And I'd rather buy in and lean into the chaos of finding a player who's going to give me a 120-point differential over the season versus someone who's going to give me a 60-point differential over position over the season. And I think that's where I would want to buy into this narrative of taking the opportunity to take difference makers and to try and really break the top of drafts early with running backs. I don't hate the idea of running back. I think we have to really see where the boards are starting to sit. Last year we saw a record low in terms of the last 7 years in terms of running backs going in the top 12. And those that took Christian McCaffrey will be cursing themselves. Will say, I'm never taking a running back in the first round again. It's ruined my season. Blah, 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 blah. It happens. All right. It happens every year. It happens with David. You know, that is part of the risk of running backs, unfortunately. It happened with David Johnson. It's happened with Christian McCaffrey before. It's happened with Jonathan Taylor. You know, it happens, right? That is part and parcel of doing business. But what if it doesn't happen? Like, you can't categorically tell me that you would have passed on Christian McCaffrey last year at the 101 because you thought he was going to get injured, knowing what he put up the year before when he was a difference maker.
Mm-hmm.
So, for me, I think you could see 6, 7 running backs in the first round this year, potentially. Depends on format, depends on a few little factors, NFL draft, coaching. But I think realistically, you could see 6, maybe 7 in the first round this year, or that sort of by the turn, and I think that's important to look at. Should we do touchdowns?
Touchdown! Yeah, let's do it.
Touchdowns, right? So I always maintain that a lot of touchdown scoring is luck, right? It's down to you've got to be someone who's in the right situation at the right time of a team. A lot of things have to happen to sort of score a touchdown. So I've been doing this for a few years, and I wanted to look at touchdowns over expected, right? So these players here, and this doesn't have all of them. This is a really hard graph to kind of look at, and it will drive some people absolutely bonkers, which is fine. This graph here highlights the running back players, and where the line is, where the bar graph is over the line going upwards. These were those that were hyper efficient in terms of touchdowns, and then on the other side you've got these players on the other side who are hyper under efficient when it came to touchdowns. And so what we're saying is that if all things remain the same, and this is the key phrase here, right, is if all things remain the same, these players are in line for regression back to the mean, and that can be negative regression or positive regression. And for those who don't understand what positive regression means, regression is a mathematical term that stands for to the mean. That is what regression means. So you can have positive regression to the mean. You can go from -5 to 0. That's a positive regression to the mean. I know it seems counterintuitive in pop culture, but here we are. We are looking at running backs who statistically overachieved in the touchdown column. The number one standout in this position by quite some way is Mr. James Cook. Mr. James Cook punched in a total of 17 touchdowns. My model had him banking on closer to 10. So it's even weirder in the sense of when it came to him, like he's in that offense with Josh Allen, and Josh Allen vultures touchdowns quite significantly. So it is a little weird that even happened. But I've just done some basic analysis on this. So again, he scored 6 touchdowns in 2023, so a significant jump. That touchdown rate was ridiculous. So his red zone usage is significantly below the league average. So he had some really big plays that went for touchdowns, which again, you would not expect to happen. And actually, all of his metrics and numbers, he was an RB2 the whole season. And the thing that vaulted him into an RB1 was his touchdown count. So I just think James Cook is going to be priced as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2 going into next season. And his price is baked in all on those 17 touchdowns. So I'm out at cost on James Cook. If James Cook goes around RB18 onwards, I'd buy with the hope that he could repeat some of this performance, but I can't see him outperforming much better than that RB18 perspective. So he very much overachieved on touchdowns. And we do this analysis because we're trying to understand when we get the market is telling us what players are worth, and we don't know what they are because there's not many 2025 drafts. But if James Cook is anywhere above RB18, he's overpriced, and this is why he's overpriced. So you need to fade at cost and move away from James Cook and move towards other players. I'm not saying you necessarily bank on all of these regression candidates, positive regression candidates, but we're just trying to understand what the big differences are. Next up is Jahmyr Gibbs. So Jahmyr Gibbs had, my model had him at close to 12 touchdowns, and he scored 16. So at the end of the day, Jahmyr Gibbs' numbers, so Jahmyr Gibbs' numbers are again hyper efficient. He actually scored on 43% of his green zone touches. So that's touches inside the 10, which is a ridiculous amount. The league average is closer to 20. David Montgomery is still there. He's going to be a factor. And the fact that David Montgomery was injured opened up a lot more opportunities for James Cook, which he punched in at a well above average rate. Now, Gibbs is an above average running back. So I'm prepared to admit that he will score above the average rate in a good offense, which is designed to score touchdowns at the goal line. But he is sharing that role with Montgomery. And so he is a regression candidate. I don't think it affects his price too much. I think, Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a top 5, top 6 running back. So I don't think it's anything to be concerned about. But if you're drafting him based on his performance, you have to understand that he was hyper efficient and in the touchdown column. And we probably just want to be a little bit aware of that. And we probably want to, as a result, just have it in our minds. Shouldn't affect his cost too much. But if you're banking on those 16 touchdowns next year, I'm probably not seeing it. I expect a number sort of closer to 11, 12 or so. Derrick Henry is the only other one here on the negative regression. So he was 3 touchdowns over. He went from, I had him around 13. He punched in 16. So he's the other one here. And I mean, listen, he's an above average running back. He was in a scheme that kind of worked well with him. But I think given his age, I just think that he won't outperform for too much longer. Again, 3 touchdowns, 18 points on the season. Does it really affect his value so much? No, not really. He's still going to be drafted at a cost that you're either going to be comfortable with or not. But it's just fine to sort of highlight these numbers. And then when I look at the other side, players that significantly underperformed, I'm going to ignore some of these players just because they're not that interesting. So Najee Harris, for example, I don't care. I hate to say it, I don't care. Like Najee Harris is Najee Harris. Like he's always underperformed in this column. Like I just get used to the fact that he underperforms in that Steelers offense at scoring touchdowns. It's just a given. So, yes, he was particularly bad. Yes, there'll be some regression back to the mean by a couple of touchdowns. Sure. I mean, this model says he's over 5 worse off than he should have been. I don't think he claws all 5 back. I think he's probably 2 short. Am I still drafting him next year? No, not unless he goes somewhere else. Then maybe. But yeah, I don't have the same interest in Najee Harris as I do on some of these other players. So I'm going to skip him. I'm going to talk about DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift only scored 5 touchdowns. My model had him closer to 11. A lot of things went wrong for DeAndre Swift last year. I'm prepared to give him a pass. He had one of the worst offensive coordinators in the history of the NFL, who got sacked, and Shane Waldron after 6 games. They're talking about bringing in Press Taylor, which if that happens, yeah, man. If Ben Johnson brings in Press Taylor, like he needs his head examined. I'm hoping they bring in someone better. The fact that you got Ben Johnson now, that offense will be better. It's a year established. I think they'll get some O-line help. I think they'll do things a bit better. I think DeAndre Swift will be in a better situation in 2025 than he was in 2024. So, again, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, more cohesive offensive line. Caleb Williams has done another year in that offense. I just think things will go back to being better for Swift. I don't know what his cost is going to be. I think he's a really difficult one to predict. I think if you're getting him at mid RB2, I think it's not bad. I think if he's going as a high-end RB2, RB1, I'd probably fade. There's too much ambiguity there. Even if I think he could get there, I think that's his ceiling. But the one thing I would say is there's some nice baked-in positive regression to almost 6 touchdowns coming his way next year, which should help nicely. Devon Achan's next. He was expected to have 16 touchdowns. He scored 11, so about 5 and a bit short. Again, Achan's interesting. We know what he can do. That offense just died last year. It was awful when Tua was injured. Tua came back. The offense just didn't really run to the high octane it has done. And so purely that his numbers are all down on that this offense was just a really bad offense for the final 8-9 weeks of the season. We would expect that offense to be better, but Devon Achan will be there. I think Devon Achan could be a really nicely priced asset next year as a result, but it's one to really keep an eye on for next season for him. But he's got some positive touchdown regression coming his way for sure. The other one I've got here is Tony Pollard. He only scored 5 touchdowns for the Titans because the Titans are absolutely dreadful. He was expected to get nearer to 10, so just short of 5 extra touchdowns. There's room for him. He can break off big plays, so we'd expect to see that more. But more importantly, I think they will just improve with their offensive efficiency. They were near the bottom in sort of all red zone offensive categories. That will only improve when they decide who their quarterback's going to be and what they decide to do with that, because they've got some tools. So yeah, I quite like Tony Pollard as a really interesting pick there to keep an eye on moving forward. And some other names to probably shout out: Aaron Jones Sr., Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara. These are all positive regression candidates. And so it's a really high upside players like Bucky Irving, Breece Hall, James Conner. They're all like 2 or 3 touchdowns short, or maybe 4 in some of the cases of Aaron Jones and Travis Etienne. So there's even a lot of really good positive touchdown back to the mean numbers that can boost these elite performances even further in 2025.
Nice. The expected is based on your model. So
Correct.
Potentially these could vary, but if you use other people's numbers, right?
Yeah, so it's my own formula. So other people out there might have different formula in what they value as criteria. I'm not going to sort of spill the secret sauce of my formula. What I will say is that I look into proportional of touchdowns. So I look into where they're getting carries. Are they like inside the 5? Are they inside the 10, for example? I take those into account, weight those touchdowns and opportunities slightly heavier than like the 50-yard ones, which are just, there's so many things that have to go right on a play for a running back to score 50 touchdowns. It's not that the running back's just got great speed. It's the quarterbacks had to have picked up the play. It's had to be in one heck of a design scheme. The blockers all have to be in the right place. The defense are likely going to have made a mistake. There's too many other factors to award that significantly highly. So there's a lot of factors that go into making a model like this. I find this model's reasonably accurate. Yes, it's always going to have some mistakes. What I will say is that elite players will break the model. Mike Evans is a great example. Mike Evans outperforms his touchdown number every single year. That's just part and parcel of having a great player. players will outperform models because elite players are better than the average. Shocker. The same way that really bad players will always notoriously, like, I'm not saying Najee Harris is a bad player, but the situation and everything that he's in, he's one that notoriously underperforms this model every year, which is why I kind of just ignore it, because it doesn't matter, because he underperforms my model every year. And that's situation, talent, coaching. There's a lot of things that go into my evaluation of that situation. So, I think elite players and elite systems will outperform the mean, because Jamar Chase is another one. He outperformed the system. I think he's in line for some regression. I don't think he'll regress all the way back to the mean because he's an elite player.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. So next up, we've got some points against streaming Murph. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do it in another show? It's entirely up to you.
I mean, I could cover off the running back streaming in like under 5 minutes, and then we've kind of done the running back position right. So that probably just makes the most sense. So I'll pull up. I'm not going to go into too much detail. We can do all the streaming on another show, maybe. But I will just show the running back position against streaming. Right, I think that will probably just help enough. So I do a streaming model every year where I pick a player that's under 30% owned every week. I measure where they perform over, like, streaming over the season, based on that ownership. So a player goes over 30% owned, then I think we talked about this the last time we were on, and how we get to these numbers, right? So ultimately, I make a streaming pick every week. I actually pick 2, and then I take the higher performing one. Just because sometimes it's like I'm on the fence, and it just makes it a little bit easier. Still picking from a heavily reduced pool. So anyway, I streamed the running back 9 overall this year, with a total of 235 points, which is about 14 points per game. Now, I'm going to just change the view on this so that it makes it a little bit easier. I might go one more. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so what I've got here is there's a line somewhere down here of players who beat the streaming model on a points per game average. So even though I stream the RB9, obviously injuries play a factor. So I look at the players that beat it on a point per game schedule. So Saquon Barkley, easily the best. Then you've got Henry, Gibbs, Robinson, Mixon, Jacobs, Kamara, Taylor, Cook, Williams, Achan. Then you kind of got these few that just kind of got over the line. Hubbard, Montgomery, Connor, Walker, Chase Brown, and Dobbins sort of tied the model, but he's non-negative, so he clears the bar. So that's 17 players who beat the stream or equaled the stream model. So it's interesting to say that all of these players are, well, obviously mostly highly drafted, with the exception of Dobbins, Brown. It's probably it. Yeah. Dobbins and Brown are probably the only 2 there that aren't a reasonably, and Hubbard. So those 3 are the only 3 that aren't a reasonably high draft pick. So this again ties in this narrative of the value at the top end of the board, and then also the alternative of having to stream winners every week, and having to do that's quite tough. And you see it in these negative numbers in terms of how far you're giving up at the position. So it is really important to showcase this, that actually finding waiver wire replacements are out there. I found this year it was a lot harder. There weren't too many running back replacements, again, due to injury at the position and due to a few other factors. And again, that lack of depth plays into it. That it's really hard to stream the position. It's really hard to punt value at the positions. So, you need to invest in these guys at the top of the board, because they are points different makers. These points against streaming, that's every week. They add up very, very, very quickly. And if you're relying on these sort of players to win you a title, and you're giving up 7 points a week or more, that's quite a significant amount to try and make up. So how are you going to make those up structurally? You'll need a draft like an absolute god to do so. And that's really hard. And so, yes, there is risk with the injuries at the running back position. But this is telling you that actually this is the hardest position to stream. So I look at all the other positions. I stream the quarterback 6. I stream the wide receiver 4. When we cover the wide receiver show, it's a bit of a false number, this number, because it's sort of a game of two halves. First half of the season, I streamed the wide receiver 1. Second half of the season, I streamed like the wide receiver 20 something. It was quite bad. But this is kind of telling you the values of positions and where you can pick up points. And so telling you that the running back position is the hardest to stream, and why it's the hardest to stream, because of the lack of depth and because of the lack of elite performance that those players will give you. Again, all of this show is pointing towards the fact that you should invest in running backs. And this is an hour-long worth of hypothesis I've put together with reason and logic and argument based on what the NFL is telling us, based on the trends of the NFL, the trends of the position, and this draft class that's coming up. And so you can listen to this and you can hogwash it, and that's fine. You know, I don't claim to be right about everything, and I encourage healthy debate, and you can disagree with 5% of this or 95% of this, and I'm absolutely okay with people coming at me to discuss this further and to understand it further and ask questions and dig into it, like, absolutely. But I think what people don't see is the amount of work that goes into our takes, our reasons, and our analysis. And so part of this is saying that actually there's a lot of foundation for it. Now, our interpretation of it could be wrong. It could be different to other people's. But at the same token, we're not just plucking stuff out of the air, right? We're not just saying this is going to happen and why. And you know, there's a lot of thought that goes into this. And part of doing it in this way, right, is, and showing all these numbers and showing all these stats, it's not to convince anyone, right? I don't feel the need to convince anybody on this stuff. I don't sit here and think for my ego that if 50 people after this video turn around and go, that's amazing, I completely agree with you wholeheartedly, 100% with zero challenge, that's a validation of my approach. Like, I'm comfortable with it. People will take it or don't take it. I don't mind. The actual reason I do this is I also could be wrong, right? So I'm transparent in process, but I'm teaching people how to create their own process. So I've taken a lot of data that all of this is available. Most of it is available for free. And you can sit here and you can do all of this stuff yourself. You can track waiver wire picks. You can create your own streaming metrics. You can create your own touchdown regression metrics if you want to do things slightly different from me. I haven't completely outlined how I built it, but I've given you some breadcrumbs to kind of figure it out. I've given you running back data analysis, which you can take and extrapolate your own opinions and beliefs and thought processes, and all of that's really healthy. But ultimately, the point of this show is to educate listeners into what to look for, how to find data, how to make the most of it, and to give them the tools to create their own system. And they'll take some of ours and some of, the Fantasy Sanctuary, and they'll take some of JJ Zacharyson, and they'll take some of the fantasy footballers, and they'll take things from all different places. That's a really good approach. You'll end up creating your own sort of secret sauce. I don't need people to just subscribe to all of this and go, yep, he's bang on the money, 100%. Thanks very much. I'm bought in. I'm a disciple. Like, I mean, if you are, great. Like, I'm not saying that's like terribly bad, but that means I've kind of done a good job convincing people that this kind of makes sense, right? But challenge it. Like, do your own homework on some of these numbers. Like, pause the video, write down the numbers. Like, pause the videos and try and think. Yeah, I think he's right about a lot of this stuff, but there's something I just don't agree with. Have it out with me, debate with me. Like let's formulate. You might teach me something, and you might get me to think about things differently. I don't have all the answers, right? But I want people to understand that our takes come with a lot of logic and reason, and a lot of it, and a lot of research. And I want people to kind of build their own systems and kind of learn how to fish on their own as well, which is why I think we're niche to this show as opposed to others that will just tell you how to pick players.
Yeah.
Pick this player. This player will go off this season, and then that's it.
We've always said that, though, haven't we? We've always said it's a show of ammunition as opposed to a loaded gun.
Yes.
There's probably a better metaphor than that.
Yeah, but I think it makes sense, right? I think that's just important to put out there that actually process is more important than results, right? And we play for the wins, right? We play for the wins, of course we do. And if you're just a casual player, then the wins are all that matter. But how do you get repeatable success? It's about process, right? And if you've got a really good process, you'll have repeatable success. You won't just be a one-hit wonder. You win 1 year and then you don't win for 5 more years. You build a foundation of approach, and sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And some years you're going to have bad years and you're going to have good years. But if the process is right, the wins will outweigh the losses. That's kind of how I view it. And for me, we're just trying to build good processes together as a community, as a channel, and for me, it's about making sure that we're doing that for everyone. And this also is an open-ended question. If there is something that you want more explanation on, or you want to understand more of, or you want us to deep dive further on, or how to build a process, or whatever it is, shout it out. Let's do it. Like, this is your channel as much as ours. Like, let's figure it all out together. And if I don't know, I'll find someone who does, and I'll get them on, and we'll do it together.
Super smashing. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you want to write in the comments on the YouTube video, if there's anything you want us to go through or anything, and Murph can either know it, find it, and we'll show it. That's a t-shirt. It's taking us 1 hour and 7 minutes, but know it, find it, show it. I think it's a good one.
Know it, find it, show it.
Yeah.
And then see it, sort it.
Yeah. Transport, British Transport. You can't take that. We've claimed it. It's,
you can't. And it is better than see it, say it, sort it. I've never understood see it, say it, sort it. Right. So see it, say it, sort it. Okay. So let's say there's a bomb on a train. Right. I see it. So I see there's a bomb on the train. Great. Okay. Say it. There's a bomb on the train.
That's going to stop it from going off.
Sort it. Done. I've seen it. I've said it. It's sorted. Somehow, I don't think the bomb's not going to go off if I've seen it and I've said it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's a bit more to it than that, but the catchphrase could be slightly better. But if you have questions about quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, we are going to cover those as well. So do not fear, that will be happening. There will be a retro on all of those as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. We'll get into it. Might not be quite as much analysis, just because the running back one, there's a lot more of a story to tell and to understand, but we will try and get into it as much as possible and go
100%. 100%. I'm excited for this draft. The draft class in running back is so good. So yeah, the landscape will change a little bit, I think, but that's only for the better. Fantasy football needs more running backs, baby. We're just the more the merrier, because Lord knows they get injured.
Absolutely.
Right, Rush Nation. Anything else, Murph, before we jet?
No, man. We'll be back next week with a show, and then we probably won't have one for a couple of weeks after that. So yeah, let us know what you want, and yeah, we'll dive into it, and we'll go from there.
Super duper. That's going to do it for today's Rush. that's going to do it for today's show, Rush Nation. As always, don't forget, keep rushing.